when things don't go well, we have a propensity to criticize. We really actually have a propensity to harm one another, even unintentionally, but I think sometimes there's intent behind it. And the
Mhm.
intent is, you're angry, we find ourselves in a low emotional intelligence moment, and we want an outlet for our anger, and the easy thing is to lay blame. Dude, I told you, we say, to get this thing done. Why the hell isn't it done? Get it done. And boom, there's the attack.
So
And
you
we
have shame, yeah, so I'm glad you're going there, because that in the back of my head too is saying during the debrief, what are you doing with the shame, the blame? The gifting of the stress, which we learned from the month before. And obviously they have a tactical plan, and I'm not sure if it was you or not that said, go for commitment and respect, not 100% in agreement. Is that do you agree with that? Did that come from you? Because if I'm saying if you can get to commitment, put down the blame, put down the emoting, put down the angst, commit to the next mission and what we need to course correct.
I
Um,
agree. I didn't come
okay,
up with those words, but I agree. And one of
okay,
our roles as a leader is to get input, but not necessarily to agree with all input. We got to make a
okay,
call on which direction we're going to go, but then it's also our charge to rally the team to want to go and do the thing that they argued against when you made the decision that this is the direction we're going to go. And there's an art form to this too. And so we need commitment from the team to try to make whatever the final decision is work. But I'll come back to the accountability piece real quick to say that we need something to help us to maintain high EQ
mhm,
as we work through our challenges. And the beauty of the debrief approach, and in our session we briefly discussed the 4F or F4 methodology. The beauty of this is it forces us to have a truth-based approach to learning as opposed to an emotion one-sided approach. And that emotional one-sided approach is so toxic, so poisonous. It disrupts the fabric of team. And that's the thing that we're building towards in order to survive in disruption. And I have a recent case study that I think is useful for us.
and give me the rewind for me in my brain, the 4 F's again.
Yeah. So the entry point into accountability is being in passionate agreement on what the mission was and what the objectives were. So let's just, before we even get to the 4 F's, we have
Right,
to be in agreement on what the mission was,
right,
or what we're trying to accomplish here, and what is the way that we're going to measure mission success. And that's our objective. An
good
objective has to be
result,
measurable, achievable, time constraint.
right.
Good. As much as it seems intuitive that we would need to know the mission and objectives, I just, in Top Gun Teamwork Cohort 4, Session 10, we only have two more to go, watched an entire group of people completely violate hey, what's the mission? What's the objective over here? And they attacked. They attacked in our little case study scenario, breakout sessions. Everybody went straight to hey, we just fault. Here's the fault. Here's who's to blame. Here's what we're going to fix. And everybody got it wrong.
Mhm,
Literally everybody got it wrong.
mhm.
Good. So then we got these 4 F's. First F is facts.
Right.
And the fact gathering phase of an accountability session that we call a debrief is a collaboration, not a one-way dictation.
And
And if
so
we
they're
don't,
coming to the debrief with the facts ready.
right,
And
with
you
their
know what facts, what numbers to count.
that's
That's
right.
so that's when
That's
you
right.
say set up the structure and don't veer from the structure. The structure is you bring these numbers, blah, 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 every time we have a debrief.
That's right.
Say these numbers this week and next week you got this number because we don't know where we're going. Okay.
Numbers, whatever's relevant to that debrief
Right.
based upon the mission. And this is so important that we're going to spend half of our time in the debrief gathering the facts. 10-minute debrief, 5 minutes is spent fact gathering. And whoever's leading the thing needs to speak the least, because the team leader thinks that they know exactly what happened. And that's part of the problem when it comes to accountability. So I'm going to assume that I know what happened over here based upon a limited perspective. And because of that, I may rush to a conclusion, rush to judgment that may be technically incorrect. So in order to protect myself as a leader, I need to get all of the facts on the table before I do any analysis. And it is our tendency to analyze absent the full truth.
So give me an example of something that isn't, that would be a fact that isn't a number, because I always say everything in a company can be counted. Even if Joe has to change, smile more during the day, we can count how many people at the end of the day say you smiled at them, right? Or you connected with them. What would be an example of something that wasn't a number?
So in Debrief to Win, I write about my weapons school look ride. So let's talk about that, okay? And I know that this isn't a business example, but it's a great example, and we're gonna reference this a couple of different ways. So, in order to get accepted to the fighter weapons school, I had to fly with a current instructor when I was a prospective student, and this is your one chance to shine. So you're already in the top echelon, but the weapons school wants to fly with you to see if you really are all that. And so it's a high stakes, high pressure, like even the squadron's rallying behind you, like, come on, Cujo, do good, and you're going to go in and do a dogfighting profile against one of the best F-15 pilots on the planet. And so that everything's stacked against you, so
Right.
I go into this thing, beautiful day, we're at Nellis Air Force Base. I mission plan this thing. I give the pre-mission briefing as if my instructor, who outranks me and has like zillions hours more flight time, is my student. I go lead him through 5 dogfight engagements, and then I come back and lead the debrief. And on the 5th engagement, I gunned my instructor. Right behind me, you see an F-22 gun barrel, 6-barrel Gatling gun in the F-15, shooting 20-millimeter rounds. We simulate that when we fly against one another. I literally gunned my instructor, which is a inconceivable outcome against one of the best F-15 pilots on the planet. So I'm up there thinking, I am the king of the world. We come back, and I lead the debrief, and I'm so fired up. I can't wait to tell my friends, I did it. And on that last engagement of the day, I spent 35 minutes teaching my instructor how not to get gunned by Cujo. And I thought if you had been a fly on the wall, you would have said everything that Cujo said was gospel. I was positive. I was upbeat. I was fact based. I was like rocking. Okay, so now I finish my part, turn it over to my instructor, and he goes, "All right, Cuj, nice job today. Big picture, good job mission planning. You gave a great pre-mission briefing. In-flight execution was solid. Your debrief is where you really need to focus, and specifically the last engagement of the day is the one that I want to focus on." And I'm like, "Oh, I get it. Now your pride's kicking in. You just got punished by Cuj. Now you're going to come up with some weak justification, And so I'm actually surprised, because this is totally counter to our ethos that he would be challenging this. But anyway, he goes, "Hey, Cujo, so let me just ask you, like, in your debrief methodology, where are you looking to understand what's going on in my world?" I'm like, "What do you mean? Where am I looking to understand what's going on in your world? I understand what's going on in your world. You're literally getting gunned by Cujo." you know and he's like, "Well," he goes, "I think I probably have some data that would be useful to you. So why don't you ask me, like, right about here, where my nose is coming on you, what are you seeing in your cockpit, and what are you thinking about doing? Why don't you just ask me that question?" And I'm playing along because he outranks me, and he's like, but inside, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, are you really going to justify getting gunned by me somehow?" So I'm like, "All right. What were you seeing when I was about to gun your brains out," or whatever, however I said it. He goes, "Oh, thanks, Cooch. In my cockpit, I'm seeing a master caution light and an engine fire light." And all of a sudden, I realized that we were flying 2 different missions at that point. I am trying to put the gun on. He is trying to save his life and his airplane. He's on fire. That's a relevant fact to this debrief, because now the conversation is no longer how do you avoid these rounds of bullets that are coming at you. The real question is, why didn't we stop fighting and put you in the lead and get this airplane back on the ground to protect you and this national asset? Like, that's the focus. And we could have avoided wasting 35 minutes of time talking about something that was irrelevant.
Yeah.
So a relevant fact is, hey, this is what I'm seeing as the team lead. What's going on in your world? Team member says, "Yeah, that's about the time that we get the call about this," or "This is where Susan calls in sick because of the accident," or "That's where we got notification that the budget was overrun," or whatever the truth is that allows us then to have an accurate analysis. And that's such an important point that we're going to spend half of our time in a 10-minute debrief or whatever to make sure that we've got the right facts on the table.
So the ground truth.
The ground truth. We're going to call it the proximate truth. We want to get at least 90% there. We're never going to get 100%.
Yeah, which is very interesting. So the
And then
second F is what?
second step, we have to identify a focus. Like, what is the question that we're here to answer? And the focus is directly tied to the objective that we set in planning. And so if we didn't set an objective in planning, we literally cannot measure because we don't know what the measurement standard is going to be.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
Did we have the time to do the Jimmy's birthday party experience with you all?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
and so if we did that, then I almost 100% guarantee that we did not know what the correct standard was against which we were going to measure, and that sets us down a path where we miss the mark entirely, feeling good about ourselves along the way. And that's another issue. It goes back to the quality of our planning, sets conditions for whether or not we can practice accountability effectively. And so we need to measure, why did we or did we not achieve mission success as defined by our yardstick we define as an objective? That's the second step. Third step is we have to find a satisfying, sufficient, substantive root cause to our why question. And there's methodology at play here, but ultimately it gets down to, we're not going to be satisfied with the first answer that comes to our head. We have to keep on digging.
And when you say why is it that we did what we didn't accomplish happen? Okay. And you're getting
Why,
context from
why did
we're
we or
trying
did
to
we not
measure.
achieve? So here's one. Let's say that I had showed up late to your board meeting. All right. Let's say that I was 45 minutes late. You might have asked me, "Hey Cujo, why were you 45 minutes late?" I might have come back and said, oh, I'm so sorry. I was on my way to your house where we conducted the board meeting, ran out of gas. Rental car, trapped on the side of the road, out of gas, took forever to get an Uber to find me because I was not near any relevant reference, pick me up and bring you to here. So where do you go there? I told you my root cause is I ran out of gas.
Right.
Where do we take this analysis? What do we do with that? Many times people will tell me, well, hey Cujo, how about tanking up the night prior, right? Like, how about you fill the gas tank the night prior so you have enough gas to come to the location? But I would come back and say, well, the assumption here is that we've got the right root cause. I'm not satisfied with, I ran out of gas and that's the root cause. I'm going to continue to dig. I might, if I'm interrogating myself in this case, and say, hey, Cujo,
Mhm.
when were you aware that you were low on gas? I'd come back and say, as soon as I cranked up the car at the hotel. Okay, Cujo, are there any gas stations around your hotel? Yeah, there's plenty of gas stations. Why didn't you stop at a gas station and tank up before you came here, even if it meant you might be a minute or two late? Well, that's easy. I didn't have any money.
Oh,
Well, that's an interesting twist, isn't it? All
why
right,
didn't you
Cujo.
money?
Cujo asks Cujo, why didn't you have any money? Oh, that's simple. I gambled it all away last night. Oh, that's an even more interesting twist, isn't it? You gambled away all your money last night. How many nights during the work week are you out there gambling away your money? Well, I try not to lose it all every night, but I gamble every night because that's what I do. That's who I am. Now we found a substantive answer to the why question. It's too easy to
Yeah.
follow a symptom, right? So we need to have some sort of methodology to get to substance. There's an art form to that. 5 whys is a nice way to kind of think this thing through, although there are plenty of issues with 5 whys, goes probably beyond our fireside chat today to make it more
Yeah.
human for us, right?
Well,
But
in
then,
Vistage, and it makes sense. I resonate with that because in Vistage, we always say go below the iceberg. And we'll start new members that come onto the board with their question cheat sheet so that they know how to ask, not questions yes or no, but open-ended questions that say, so you're trying to get context.
that's right.
Get the lay of the land of the context of what's going on. And it is interesting that so many people do not give context, they just give a factoid, and the factoid isn't necessarily right.
That's
My
right.
dad, yeah.
So
Like,
if you sense here, like up front, we're trying to get to the proximate truth so that we're analyzing the correct things. In our analysis, we're trying to get to a substantive answer, and then really the third F isn't root cause; it's framing. What are we
mhm,
framing? We're framing the root cause. Why are we framing the root cause? Because ultimately, a debrief is a leadership conversation, and how we lead matters. So let's just change the scenario. Let's just say that in our company here, we found out Fitz didn't flip the switch last night when she should have. Because of that, the server went down. Because the server went down, we lost a couple mil overnight.
Mhm.
All right. And we don't have a couple of mil to just be squandering due to a flip
Right.
switch problem. So I got a leadership decision right now. Given the context of who Fitz is, how long she's been here, all the great things that she's done for us, I can choose to attack her and tell her what a worthless human being she is and how little I have for her, and she better fix this immediately, otherwise she's fired, done. I can use some really volatile language in the process. That's my choice. And maybe that's the right choice.
Mhm.
Another choice that I've got, though, depending on the circumstances, and that's where framing is context-based and situational, I might say, look, given everything that's going on over here, Fitz is already upset enough about the fact that she forgot to flip the switch last. I don't need to punish her in this situation. What I need to do is build her up. I might choose to frame it this way. Hey, Fitz, do you realize we were one switch actuation away from victory last night?
Yeah.
I know it sounds funny, but it's true. And we already understand what needs to be done tonight to have a victorious night. Fitz, any question in your mind about what you need to do to help us to achieve mission success? Didn't think so. So
Yeah.
rock it, Fitz. Rock this thing. And I can't wait to come in tomorrow to read the report. Again,
So
it's a choice.
it almost is, it's interesting. I guess I could take the word accountability and replace it with context. It's a word my father always taught me. Always get the context, because everybody's perception is different, even people's context is different. And context leads you below the iceberg, but it also leads you up, rises you up if you can teach and train people to
Oh,
ask the
yeah.
questions of my dad used to study poverty, and he said people who, are in poverty, there was one common denominator: they don't ask questions. So do you teach people then in your forums and groups how to ask these questions to get context?
Absolutely. You have to, because
Yeah.
that's the whole, but that's also why the rigor of the approach, having a methodology that you can fall back to, is so important.
Okay.
Because it assists you in that process. You know that we cannot move forward until we've gotten all the facts on the table. And so you're going to strive to to seek to understand. You're going to know what to measure against, because you have to have that in order to measure. Absent a standard, there can be no measurement. Like literally, we cannot measure. We know that root cause analysis is going to get us to a substantive answer, but oftentimes that substantive answer can be a painful experience for somebody. Our choice, how painful to make that. Sometimes it's great to exploit the pain. I had one of my favorite debriefs ever. I made a horrible call as a brand new weapons school graduate, chief instructor pilot of a squadron. I violated the heck out of an Air Force standard. And everybody remembers it to this day. It was such a big deal. What did my commander do? Before I even went into the debrief of this mission, where I was going to point the finger at myself, he comes in, pulls me literally. I think he literally pulled me by my flight suit into an empty
Mhm.
debrief room, slammed the door so that the entire squadron could hear it. Said, "Don't you ever," screamed it, "don't you ever effing do that again." Left the room, slammed the door behind him, and walked away. Now, what's fascinating about this is that was totally contrary to his style.
Mm,
What's also fascinating about it is he knew he didn't even need to do that for me. He just needed to do it for everybody else.
got it.
And even more fascinating is we never talked about it again, and he's one of my best friends to this day. It was so epically classic. Like it was wonderfully done. So there's times for that. We have to ask ourselves, is it always the time to be slamming doors and screaming, "Don't ever do this"? Probably
Mhm.
not. And
Yeah.
ultimately, what is all of this stuff setting us up for? It's the fourth F, which is way forward. Like all of this analysis was designed to help us to be able to plan more effectively next time. We're extracting learning from this iteration that's going to go right into the planning for the next one, and ought to help us to improve.
Yeah.
Now, there's a
So,
lot. Yeah,
yeah, and it's, so the debrief, the context, I get it. I like the getting below the iceberg, and the context that gives you the accountability. It takes away the assumptions, the different perspectives that people have because they've been tattooed and imprinted differently. Um, I always have said to the CEOs that come into my boardroom, you got to be a psychologist and you got to be a drug dealer, because you got to expense oxytocin and serotonin. Every now and then you do got to get the pat on the back. And you got to shake the hands, and you got to tell your team you're doing good. The psychologist, you kind of got to figure out what's going on. That guy, obviously, when he threw you in the room, he was being the psychologist because he was going to make an impact on the ones outside of the room. And then you got to be a preacher. You got to have your lessons that you know exactly what to do. So when a company goes in and takes this on and they start to indoctrinate it into their culture, I'm assuming that the way that they would do this is it's not just, okay, maybe this is why it's kind of fallen flat. Here's the debrief. We're going to get the data. We're going to get, it's really kind of a, very mindful approach in a system that covers everything from the emotional to the mental to the actual to the strategic, and puts it together and creates that flywheel of a debrief so that if something comes off that flywheel, we can pull it right back in again.
That's
Very
right.
interesting.
It actually contains all of the attributes of what it takes to lead effectively. And I've said since I was a young captain in the Air Force, if you can lead a debrief well, then you can lead anything, literally.
Yeah.
And this idea of building an environment of psychological safety is so mission critical to being able to create a learning organization. And I don't think I ever used those terms as an Air Force officer. I certainly never learned them in any of the master's programs that the Air Force taught me. I would have run away from it had you exposed me to it as a fighter pilot. I would have been like, who needs any of this foo-foo stuff? Not realizing that we've got more of it than most organizations on the planet. And that's fascinating to me. But I'm going to go back one step and also say that one of the poisons in an organizational setting is the rush to judgment. And that thing can catch like wildfire and spread to the organization's significant detriment. And if I may, I'll give you maybe just one quick case study of how this debrief process can actually put a stop to that as well. So there was an issue very, very recently where a teammate of mine was accused of not supporting somebody the way that he had promised to do so. And ultimately, comments were made in a public forum by somebody who felt let down. And it was, I'd say, a low EQ moment. And this individual publishes this attack against my teammate, and by extension, all of us, and says, whatever, not to be trusted. In my estimation, that was a very human response to what the person in question felt was a letdown. And all of us are entitled to human responses. All of us have low EQ moments for sure. How it is that we respond to those low EQ moments is a testament to character, but even there, sometimes we may not be at our level best. I'm less interested in the person's EQ or character than the way that some people responded to what they saw. And what they saw was probably less than a half of the entirety of the picture. But the rush to judgment in the absence of the full truth was actually a worse character assessment against the people who were rushing to judgment than the person who initially felt aggrieved and chose this outlet to do his thing. And it was fascinating for me, just kind of like looking at this thing from afar going, wow, it is so embedded that even people that are teaching leaders how to lead well are falling victim to a simple trap that a debrief focused mindset would inoculate us from, which is why it's so important that we understand how to do this. You cannot assess in the absence of the full truth.
Let me put it this way. What I really see you actually doing is with your mastery on this topic and being in it and experiencing it, you bring the wisdom of some of the, lessons that you've seen. Often people say, I'm a wisdom coach. And the wisdom is being able to know that, the ear, it's really not this, the wisdom is knowing when someone's projecting, I say you're projecting when you don't want to look on the inside. So you put a projector in your stomach and you turn the light on and I shoot it on you and everything's you. And so it kind of sounds like this is a methodology or process to dismantle being triggered and putting emotions into a constructive way. I mean, anger is a very constructive emotion. It's also a way to release the energy within us. And so the one guy that slams the door, he's using anger as a teaching moment. You're experiencing one way and getting it out. Everybody experienced that anger in a little different way, so that it's positive. But if he just came and emoted and berated you, and so that's the mastery and the science, and it is both, I would say, not only emotional intelligence, but somewhat of an intuitive intelligence too, because you're intuiting what you're sensing, what your gut is feeling. It's not aligning with, we're a team. Our heart, it's hurting, right? You hurt when you're not in alignment. You grieve because you haven't, because you love someone, right? You
That's right.
grieve because you love the mission and then you lost it. So there's some grief. So it is kind of that mastery. What if that is the case? So the master comes in and he brings the wisdom to the group and he teaches it over time and they begin to learn it. How long do they stay infected with that? That passion and that, I mean, does it wane and then you got to come back? Or does it end up being like, you always have, maybe 40-20-40 rule. 40 are new, 20 are and 40 always solid. You always have 40 that are solid that can pull the others through. I mean, after a while, they're like, okay, we've got our, and this has enough. It's got science, it's got intellectual, but it does have, it's got, call it, I would call it the intuitiveness, the innate of emotions and how to use them the right way. And that's powerful. That's why that guy goes home and uses it with his kid.
Here's what I'm seeing, okay? And I'll tell you from my own perspective how this has affected me, but here's what I'm seeing from folks that we're teaching this to. They're getting frustrated going back to work with people that don't do it this way because they can't unlearn what they know.
So give me that one more time.
Yeah, so we have
So
people.
is this like after you haven't gone in, or you have gone in and worked with them?
I've gone in and worked with them. We've coached them up with our little program.
Okay, and then they
now what's
get
happening is
frustrated.
they're getting frustrated. So one of our Top Gun teamwork folks will go into a meeting led by somebody that does not think and plan and do and learn the way that we do, and they're frustrated. They're like, we're wasting time. Like, why am I even sitting in this meeting? Like, what is the purpose of this meeting? Like, nobody's defined for me what it is that we're trying to accomplish with this thing, and you're taking an hour out of my day. Like, that's a fundamental violation of one of our core principles. And so what I love about this is the frustration, because they're sensing that we're spending time without clarity of why. We don't have expectations set. And so we're just going through the motions of, well, we've always done it this way, is the justification. You're like, well, that's not a sufficient justification. Not when we understand that we've got missions to accomplish and I need to use my time wisely. Similarly, when they hear of people practicing accountability, like, hey, it's time for us to practice accountability, and they're not practicing it in a way that really gets to a substantive answer that's going to help us to do the thing the next time, like, that was also a waste of time. And nobody that's been through this wants to waste time. What I can tell you is that it affects everything that I do to such a degree that my wife tunes out when we go on vacations, because she knows that I've planned this sucker to the T with contingencies and red teaming thrown in. I look forward to things going south because then I get to use one of my contingency plans and celebrate the fact that I've thought this thing through. She says, you're a geek, but you know what? That's fine. I can actually mentally check out while we go through all of this because this is so good. And when it comes to debriefs, I remember I was flying from St. Louis through Salt Lake to Boise to go do a workshop for a client a number of years ago, and we got delayed out of St. Louis an hour and a half waiting for the one de-icing truck to come to our airplane. Hour and a half before we even took off, and everybody is making connections in Salt Lake, which means that nobody made their connection, right? Anyway, we get to Salt Lake, and as we're still taxiing, these two youngsters, like I'd say college age folks, come walking up to the front of the airplane so that they're the first people out. And the flight attendant's like, hey, you need to go back to your seats. We can't taxi with people. We're on an active taxiway, and they don't move. And so then the pilot has to bring the airplane to a stop. Like, this is not good. So now everybody's already up in arms. Like, the tension is hiking. It's palpable. And now these people are preventing us. And so then they go back because we can't, then we can move, get to the thing. One of those two forces her way up to the front, like jockeying people out of the way so that she's the first person off. And now people are about to lose it. And to make matters worse, they can't get the air stairs to come to the airplane.
Oh, jeez.
So now the things that people are saying, horrible. And cell phones are coming out because we're fully expecting a fight in the front of
Right.
the
You want a
airplane.
remote?
Yeah, right. That's so. This is this whole thing. We're about to be in the Lord of the Flies, and I felt myself inclined in this direction because as I was scanning, I'm like, I'm not going to get to Boise until 2 o'clock in the morning, and I have to be on stage at 6. So I'm
Mm,
kind of angry about all of this. Anyway, long story short, I'm like, what do I teach?
mm,
I'm like, I don't have all the facts here. And I'm a cancer survivor, and I know how bad the news was when we got it. What if this young lady is trying to get to her mom to say goodbye before this whole thing comes to an end? Like, what part of the story is motivating behavior that's clearly counter to what anybody else in this
mm.
airplane thinks is right? Probably also not her standard, would be my suspicion. I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt. I'm actually going to assume positive intent here, and I'm going to change my view. And what I found for me was, even if that was a fiction, my emotional state got back in check, and I needed that right then.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll never know what the true story was, but just recognizing that the first stage of this thing says, "Hey, let's make sure we have all the facts on the table." I knew I couldn't have all the facts on the table in that moment, but if I didn't have the ability to analyze this thing. I didn't have the full truth, and so therefore, power down, Cooge. It's not worth it.
Yeah, so the advancing of the awareness. Emotional intelligence, a lot of people don't quite understand all of it. I always say it's emotionally being aware of me and then emotionally being aware of you, so that individual, and then emotionally being aware of the bridge where people get on it. And again, it's the awareness, here's me in my physical casing, and here's me emotionally advancing my awareness. It's funny you say that as a story, because I also say to some CEOs when they first come in and I start to teach them emotional intelligence and they're new on my board, I'll say, right now, if I put you on a plane and you're in this aisle seat on the left, and there's someone on this, across the aisle, and they're having a fit. They're having a meltdown. They're having a bad day. And you had thought that you would actually work on a report or something for your meeting, and they are just very, very animated and agitated. What would you do? And usually a lot of times they'll say, well, I probably get really triggered by it. And I say, well, that's good, because what I hope is in the course of the year, you would understand that you could have some compassionate action, some self-awareness, and more empathy. Empathy is important now too, but even intuit in your gut that maybe that person, has a disability, or maybe they didn't get their medication, or maybe they've, lost a spouse, or maybe they're going into some horrific thing when they got off the plane. And so you do have compassion, but the key is to take the compassionate action. And so, what you're teaching these people is, yes, to have the self-awareness inside the framework, buttoned up with all the F's, and use it to course correct every single day. And we're going to have compassion, and we're going to take action on it.
That's right. That's
And we're
exactly.
going to have a safe container to do this every single day. And I can see how that would really strengthen the culture of an organization, to where it's not, it's just the mojo, it's just the vibe of it. Um,
Bingo. Oh,
quite
by the way,
interesting.
one other reflection that we all have to acknowledge here is, and in the high performance team world, our fundamental ethos, like the thing that sets us apart as a high performance team from a regular team, is that in the high performance world, if one of us fails, we all do. Okay, so that's a distinction, and it's unique. Especially if you look at the definitions of team in our board meeting, we only talked about the Katzenbach and Smith regular team definition. We never got to the high performance team definition. And I don't even talk about it anymore because it's actually a bridge too far.
Mm,
Technically, the rest of the components make it to where we can't be a high performance team. And so what we label as high performance isn't one measured against a really tough standard. But that's okay. That's fine. As long as we're teaming, we're okay. But in this world of, if one of us fails, we all do, we also have to own, when a team member fails, we have to figure out how it is that we're complicit.
mm,
And that's the hardest part of this whole thing, is to acknowledge that, like, I lead my team. And so I have to ask myself, did I give my team enough clarity? Did I give my team enough resources to accomplish success? Did I overburden my team with too many missions? Or did I give them the space to be able to achieve mission success on the ones that are the priority right now? Was I there checking in with them mid-course to see where it was that we needed more leadership, more support. Did we pre-debrief en route to the outcome? In other words, where was it that my leadership failed this particular thing? When I learned that as a young officer, as a young fighter pilot, I mean, I'd come back in after a mission that went south, and my instructor, who might have been a Desert Storm combat veteran, like so infinitely more experienced than young Cujo when I had only 3 or 4 missions under my belt, my, my flight lead would be saying things in the debrief like, "All right, Cujo, you didn't shoot the one contact that you were responsible for, and that's the one contact that comes in and kills the 2 of us. All right." Meanwhile, my flight lead shot 3 out of the 4 enemies. So like my flight lead did more than his fair share of work. I did not do my 1/4 of the work. The 2 of us get shot because this one person comes in, and my flight lead would tell me, "Cujo, I'll give you 10% of today's bad outcome. 90% of today is on me and my leadership."
Hmm.
And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? Like, I didn't shoot my targeting responsibility. I don't buy that this is your fault." He'd come back and say, "Hey, did I query you when you didn't call that you were locked at the appropriate lock range? Did I query you when you didn't communicate that you were taking shots in accordance with our timeline?" And I'd be like, "Well, no, you didn't." He's like, "Exactly. And that's my responsibility as a flight lead." I was so enamored with the 3 people that I was shooting that I wasn't making sure that you had everything that you needed to do to get your job done. And that's a leadership responsibility. So yeah, Cuj, I'll give you 10% of today's bad outcome. 90% is a failure of my leadership. And you know what? Technically, he's right. And you know what? When you grow up that way, you can't unlearn that piece either. And so every
Right.
time that one of my teammates makes a flub in my team, I've got to ask myself, did we even have a standard in the first place? Can I measure them against? Did I clarify what it is that we're trying to accomplish here? And most of the time, I find that I come up short. But you know, the spin on this thing, Fitz, and don't mean to cut you off. I find that I'm actually slowly becoming the leader that I wish I had been when I was on active duty. The more that I teach this thing here, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm identifying the deficiencies and correcting them, and that's a good. That's
Yeah.
good.
You know, it's sparking another question that came up. I don't remember who asked it, but so, you know, you have the mission and you guys are, you know, doing this type of work because you want to. But let's take someone who's working for, you know, a manufacturing plant or, you know, it's not their career. It's just they're punching the clock 9 to 5. And I always say every behavior has a payoff. Every behavior has a payoff. Even emoting gives me a payoff because it releases dopamine in my brain, right? And it
Right.
soothes me. And getting angry does. And so the question would be like when I used to do strategic planning and teach companies strategic thinking, we would always align the mission to the personal heart. You know, what makes the heart sing is kind of the early sparks of my heart-based leadership. So how do you get people? I get that they drink the Kool-Aid, they experience their work differently. They're probably going home, not emoting on the wife and the kids, right? Because there's a place to a safe container that they can get through the frustration. There's no shame, there's no labeling. But what's the payoff? You know, how do you ever talk about payoff? I mean, the CEO has a payoff. You know, anybody who's got a stake, the stakeholders have a payoff. But it's often a question that a lot of my board members will say, how do I get you know, the janitor, you know, whoever it is, not to say that janitors are the bottom end of the totem pole, but the one that's coming in clocking the clock for $13 to
Yep.
buy into this, because I'm assuming it's going to go all the way through the organization. So,
Yeah, excellent. As I recall, we had a little bit shorter session and I was speaking fast. And because of that, I probably didn't give any insight into all the things that I've done in my life besides Air Force. And so I'll come back and share with you now that in my evolution into VMAX Group, I was part of 2 other companies. One was a
you did
startup,
that. One was finance, right? Or selling insurance.
mortgage loans.
Mark. Oh,
I was a mortgage loan officer. Okay.
okay.
And as a mortgage loan officer, I mean, and I was 1 year removed from colonel, called back to lead a 2,000 member organization. I had the possibility of becoming a multi-star general. I went from that to 100% commission salesperson over the phone, trying to convince people to trust me with their
Yes.
entire financial lives. Like it was a fascinating shift. And, and, um, and the way that we were motivated, or at least the way that the leader attempted to motivate us, was to dangle a carrot in front of us that said, "Hey, if you hit your sales goals, we're going to go to Cancun."
Mm.
And that was what the leader had been inspired by. So just kind of did that, as he was growing up. That was the way that he was incentivized, and it seemed like it worked. And so he did the same thing for us. And I understood that as a very basic means of trying to get folks to do their part. If you hit your sales goals, we as a company are going to go to Cancun. And what I found, especially because I had the additional challenge of post colon resection, I could not really go anywhere with an unpredictable body. That wasn't sufficient for me. And I also looked at what it was that I used to do. I mean, I have a pretty profound impact on our nation's defense, and I was going to be leading big chunks of this. And now I'm, being told to pound sand from whoever it was that didn't want to hear from me, as we bought horrible leads from fraudulent lead companies. And so
Jeez.
I agonized over, like, why in the hell am I here? And I, in that whole phase, had some really tough loans that I had to close out. One of them took 4.5 months to complete, and I earned $250 from at the end of those 4.5 months. And it was for a couple that had no disposable income, an elderly couple that did not have any quality of life, because literally every dollar that came in from Social Security went right back to pay the mortgage and, and allow for food purchases. That was it.
Yeah.
Now, when we restructured their loan, they had enough disposable cash to be able to go on a weekly date night. And that was a major shift in their lives. So take that as one reference point. Another loan that stood out to me was a father who refinanced his home so that he could send his daughter to Mexico to get cancer treatment that could not be obtained here, experimental cancer treatment, trying to prolong her life. And prospects were low, but at least it was something, and they could rally some hope around it. And so the refinance ends up being a mechanism to try to save a life. And as I was going through these kinds of one-off situations, all of which were like very, very complex, and like we could barely get there, and it didn't generate a lot of money, I realized these are game changers in people's lives. And the mortgage loan was an instrument that we were using. And I derived a ton of meaning and impact from that. So I would come in, work late, because I was trying to help somebody change their life. And that was really transformative for me. I still look back on those days and go, wow, we did so much good there. But the leader did not ever seek to understand the meaning and the impact of the work that we were doing. And as a result, lost an opportunity to really rally the team towards something that was connected to the heart, Fitz.
Yes,
And
right.
that's so important.
Right.
So if you're not connected to the heart, you get some hands, as Dr. Timothy Clark says, maybe a little bit of the head, but none of what really matters. And that's I'm going to clock in, clock out, search for another opportunity, and float between different jobs over and over again. It's a leadership responsibility to figure out together, collectively, to discover our why. And that's where Simon Sinek and his team have knocked it out of the park.
Yeah. I had a group at my house last night that were leaders, group of women, both Hispanic and Black, and they'd been studying my book for a year, Heart-Based Leadership, Why Heart-Based Leadership and Courage Matters. And I was very intrigued. Now, none of them are in a C-suite position. One doesn't own her own small business, but they all got into the exercise. I have an exercise in that book called What Makes Your Heart Sing. And when you figure out what makes your heart sing as an individual, you can align life and job to it. And it does make sense that if someone brought, your system in and they're working on the intuiting from the gut to the heart, then let's take the head and the tools and frame this out. But, bring your gut and bring your heart into the meeting. They begin to have a playing field that they can say, my heart sings when I can learn this from my boss, or our department can learn. Just like, the guy that goes and helps his kid who has a lousy game. He helped him or her his heart sing for the courageous impact of get up and rise up from it and learn from it. And, you just hit a stretch goal. I mean, and some people's heart likes to connect. Some people's hearts like to, here was another question too that they had. They said that in this framework that you have, because, a lot of times what I'll hear when the company goes through EOS, it's so structured. There isn't any time for the heart to kind of expand and that type of leadership or courage to come out. And what I do know is that when we're not in the egoic energy, the trickster, the story, the blame, the shame, the getting triggered, when we kind of get back into the wisdom, creativity and imagination are very powerful when we're in there. I mean, that's what Einstein said, I mean, I always say to my board members, if they come in and they're very triggered over something, well, Einstein says you can't solve anything at the energy level that it started. So fork yourself over, let's get your energy up. And even if you have to get your energy up, you've got to be able to create and innovate. So where in this process does creativity or innovation come in? It's kind of like my one member who was the professional disruptor, right? She comes in to disrupt situations to create the energy that then sparks innovation and creativity. So when they're just doing the mission and going through the exact debrief, where does innovation and creativity fit in on that? I mean, is it just when they're starting to recreate the next mission or the discovery of the learning?
It starts in the learning that takes
Okay.
place in the debrief, and then it carries over into the planning for the next mission. So let me go back to, how do we teach this? Because I think it kind of illustrates the point very, very well that in a 12-week coaching program, we'll spend the preponderance, more than 6 weeks, doing things other than debriefing and specifically learning how to plan. And in the planning phase, 5-step process, generating from the target backward being the third one of these things, what we want to do is to figure out what's the right way for us to achieve mission victory. And we're going to think through all the best that we've got, pulling from previous learning experience. Second step is to apply lessons from the past, pulling from previous learning experiences to make this one better. But then we're not going to stop there. We're going to think through contingencies. That's the fourth step. So what might, harm us along the way? And then we're going to red team this thing. And red teaming is thinking like our enemies and trying to figure out where it is that we're coming up short. And oftentimes people cannot distinguish between a contingency plan and a red team until they go out there and do. And in today's class, we had somebody who said, yeah, Cujo, I mean, we're 10 sessions in and I've still been struggling with what's the difference between contingency planning and red teaming until we executed on our big sales mission. And in the middle of executing, realized we didn't have the capacity to follow through. Somebody bought something for more than $10,000 in cash, and we didn't have the forms on hand for us to be able to fulfill this transaction in accordance with the law. And we had never thought about that because that wasn't something that came to us. If we had red teamed this, though, if we had thought about this as like a potential disruptor, like how would we defeat ourselves, we would have not had this problem. And this illustrated to us the power of this. So we've got pulling from the past, we've got planning from the target backwards, contingency planning, and red teaming to help us to find the best way possible, breaking out of a pre-existing mold along the way because things are always changing around us. Then we go out there and test it. So it's plan, brief, execute, debrief. We're going to go out there and test this in the execution of our plan. And after we test, we're going to go learn. That's what the debrief is. It's our learning tool. And based upon what we've learned in this iteration, or what we experienced in this iteration, we ought to be learning, extracting from this what is good, what is not so good, and that's going to inform the next iteration. So we're constantly learning and arguably doing better. But when we don't do better, rebounding from this really, really well in a resilience strategy. And that's how you, in small bite-sized chunks, work your way through achieving strategic success in the midst of chaos and disruption.
Right. Yeah.
If you wait until the end of the strategic plan to realize, oh my gosh, we have not done all the things we needed to, and now we're on the next iteration, or if the world's coming at us hot and heavy like COVID-19 popping out of thin air, how are we going to deal with this? And you don't have a mechanism for learning in that moment, you're way behind.
Yeah, I can see too how when you were talking about, once you go through this and it's kind of imprinted and tattooed inside the organizational culture, when someone comes in and they're not applying it, it's like, whoa. And so I'm assuming that what happens is that kind of filters out and sifts out, the teacher appears when the student's ready. And so you end up with a company that has students that are ready for this, and they begin to apply it. They end up taking it back into, they're absorbing it into their essence of who they are. They're enhancing their life with it. They're enhancing the organization with it. I got another question for you. And people who work with me always say name it and claim it and brand it, because I do strategy and marketing like Heft did and embed. So do the companies that go through this come up with a name? Because this is like a verb with energy, what you do. It's really not a process. It's an energy that you bring into an organization. So do they come up with the name for it? Like what it is? Like, so someone gets hired or they're interviewing and they go, well, we got this, it's the Vibe CCAT, whatever, and they go, the what? And they go, well, you're going to learn it because you're going to be imprinted and tattooed with it by the time you're here for a year. You're either going to hate it or love it, one of the two. So do they come up with a name?
They do. So we've got names for every one of our sub processes, but what we're finding is that companies are coming up with their own versions of the name. So for example, I think I can say this: turnkey tunneling. Turnkey tunneling has taken our Eagle planning process and they've changed it to their tunnel process.
Okay, there you go.
Everybody tunnels before they
Oh,
go off to
nice.
execute a
Yeah.
mission. Yeah.
Then it's just really part of them.
It is. I mean, it's become 100% a part of them. And it's the same thing. I forget, I should know what their debrief term is, but they've taken that and they've changed F4 to something else. And everybody that's been through the process wears their badges with pride. Everybody has a polo shirt with the Top Gun Teamwork Cohort patch that's unique to each Top Gun Teamwork cohort to identify them as a graduate of the program. And they make a big deal about it. So they've taken all of this on, and in the construction space, I mean, showing where it is that you've been certified is a big deal. Wearing it on your hats, wearing it on your vests, all of that, and they do that, which I think is really, really cool. It goes beyond the scope of what I ever envisioned for this, but they've made it their own.
Yeah, that just shows how much of energy it is that you're bringing. You're the instrument to bring it into. Very cool.
I gotta say one other thing, Fitz. One of the things. So I was reaching out to the Top Gun graduates. We actually give a Top Gun award to the top graduate of each one of our cohorts, and I reached out to the Top Gun award winner from cohort number 1, and I asked her for some help with something, and she came back and said, "Let me give you a screenshot of the number of debriefs I've done over the last couple of weeks," and it was 60. She had files for each one of these things. And that was not the question that I was asking. I wasn't asking how many debriefs have you done, but she's like, hey, just as an aside, look at all the work that we've done in the last couple of weeks. I'm like, are you kidding me? I told her, I said, I don't think in the Air Force I ever did that many debriefs in that short a period of time.
So obviously, you have a team, and I'm assuming that you go and teach leadership first, and then go to the next layer, and eventually does like the employees, like let's say from Dave's company or from Anthony's or John's or whatever, they get in a group together and they're learning, or is it a group so just for that company?
So it's yes to all of the above.
Okay. So
we've got cohorts that are just for the company. We've got participants. We had in our first cohort, we had the future CEO of a $4.5 billion company attend with 5 mid-level managers, also from the same company. We've had CEO plus all the way down to frontline project manager. We've also had just project managers and various administrative staff. And what I've found is that it seems like it's working everywhere. Like it's working everywhere, to the point where one of the companies brought a whiteboard out into the field to be able to conduct an Eagle planning session in the rain and muck with the construction team that was out there in the field, not trained up on this process, but he was using it very effectively, and used the same whiteboard in the muck to debrief the thing. They reported that they had a safety incident, and because they had planned for this and thought about that particular safety incident as a contingency, that their ability to respond was instantaneous. And they were actually it was, nobody wants to have a safety incident, but the fact that they had thought through what might happen if this were to occur and had a response plan in place was brilliant.
Mm.
So yeah, it's been very effective across the entirety of it, but we accommodate all of it.
Powerful work. I mean, my head just goes, in the beginning of the conversation, my head was going, well, this would be really good, because I'm always telling my members, you got to get your attorney, your accountant, your insurance person, all, and a quarterback, all together, to figure out what you're doing, because otherwise each one is going to outdo the other, because there's ego in the room. So that would be good. But there's so many applications to this, and it's almost like, I guess if I were to close, I would say that if there's something that's really important from a kid who learns the lessons of being able to rise up and learn to go through failure with grace and ease, or it's the making the mortgages for someone who it's going to change their lifestyle, or I used to do real estate investing and all that, or giving a home on a rent to own and getting someone an opportunity, or clearing a path, or creating awareness, whatever it is. If it's really important and it really resonates with the heart, and there's gut involved, because obviously there's heart and gut at that top gun level. I mean, there is, and thank you guys for doing it. And if those components are there, the system works. I mean, it's very cool work that you do. Thank you for that. Thank
Oh
you
my
for your
gosh,
years
thank
of
you.
service, and thank you for um enlightening me to it. I hope this kind of wakes up some people to, tune in and check it out. I'll make sure that we put your website and stuff on the end of this video. Thank you for sharing. Those who are listening and those out in Zoom land, whatever. I think you answered a lot of questions, but please keep in touch on your journey and your adventures, because you're doing important work. Much
Thank you,
more,
Fitz.
I know that your first love was what you did, but now you're the mastery in a different way. So,
Fitz, if I may, I'll say I used to think that I existed to be a fighter pilot. I mean, I truly felt that since I was 4 years old. I knew that that was what I was destined to become, and I did it. And I thought I was living my destiny. But upon further review, I do think I was a fighter pilot to do what it is that I was meant to do in this world, and
yes,
it doesn't involve flying airplanes. It was
yes.
very much doing this, and
And it's
and
probably connected with your defining moment of how things shifted in your life.
that's
Yeah.
right.
So thank you for listening to your heart and your gut. Enjoy your weekend. Thank you so much. And
Thanks, Anthony.
stay
Thanks,
in
John.
touch.
Thanks,
Yes,
Dave. Thanks,
all of you
everybody.
guys. All right. Thank you so much,
Thank you very
John.
much.
Thank you, Cujo. Okay. Bye bye.
Bye bye, everybody.